Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of kindness, love, and unexpected life changes. Today's story is about Emma Thompson, a young waitress with a heart full of compassion. Despite her own struggles, Emma's selfless acts of kindness toward the homeless bring about a series of events that will forever change her life. From a chance encounter with a mysterious stranger to an unbelievable gift, Emma learns that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a profound impact. Stay with us as we dive into her journey. Don't forget to subscribe to start today's story. Emma Thompson was a young woman who had big dreams. But life, in its own way, seemed to have placed a cap on those aspirations. At just 23, she worked tirelessly at a small, run-down diner in the heart of Chicago. Rose's Diner, as it was called, was far from glamorous. The chipped paint on the walls and the worn-out neon open sign flickering outside seemed to reflect the struggles Emma faced daily. Yet, through it all, she managed to wear a smile that could light up the room. The diner was nothing like the places one dreams of working in, especially when you're young and have hopes of doing something bigger with your life. But Emma had learned to find beauty in the simplest of things. She was not just a waitress, she was the person who made sure every customer felt valued, seen, and understood. Despite her long shifts and the meager wages, she had a gift, an ability to make others feel heard, as if their presence in her life mattered. That was Emma's true talent. She had the rare ability to make people feel good about themselves, something the world needed more of. And though the diner was often nearly empty, or filled with people who were as weary as she was, Emma made the most of it. She greeted every customer with the same warmth, no matter how tired she felt, no matter the circumstances. Yet there was something about Emma that set her apart from many of the other waitresses. It wasn't just her professionalism or her charm. It was the quiet, almost unnoticed habit she had developed over the months. Every night, after her shift, she would gather up the leftover food from the diner, those meals that were still good but couldn't be served again, and take them with her on her walk home. The cold streets of Chicago, especially in the winter, were no stranger to Emma. But what she did every night was not something many people would do. She would walk through those streets, past the neon-lit buildings and hurried crowds, to find those who had no shelter or food. She would give the leftover meals to the homeless, to the people who had nothing. To Emma, it was a small act, just a simple gesture. But for those she helped, it was the difference between another night of hunger and a small, fleeting moment of comfort. One particularly cold evening, as the rain poured relentlessly and the streets turned into rivers of water, Emma made her usual trek home. The chill of the rain cut through her worn jacket. But she didn't care. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the people she had helped that evening. As she passed a bus stop, her eyes caught a small figure huddled beneath the shelter. At first, she thought it was just another person waiting for the bus. But then she realized it was a young boy no older than 8. He was shivering uncontrollably, his clothes soaked through from the rain. Emma's heart sank as she walked closer, her gaze softening as she knelt beside him. "Hey there," she said gently, her voice soothing despite the noise of the storm. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. His face was pale, his body trembling from the cold. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he whispered, barely above a breath, "I don't have anyone. I'm hungry." Emma's heart broke at the words. Without a second thought, she reached out, took his cold little hand in hers, and helped him stand up. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't care about the details of how he had ended up there, in that rain-soaked street, all alone. What mattered in that moment was that he needed help and she was there to give it. With the boy still in tow, Emma led him to the diner. It was only a short walk, but it felt like a lifetime. The rain soaked them both, but Emma didn't care. She was focused on the little boy who, despite his fear and hunger, was trusting her in a way that she could never have imagined. Once inside the warm diner, Emma wrapped him in a thick woolen blanket and set a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. The boy's face lit up as the warmth from the soup reached his chilled skin. Emma watched him eat in silence, a feeling of deep comfort settling in her chest. For the first time that night, despite the cold rain and her own exhaustion, she felt warmth not just from the soup, but from something deeper, an overwhelming sense of purpose. What Emma didn't know was that she wasn't alone in the diner that evening. Across the street, parked under the glow of a street lamp, a sleek black car sat quietly. Inside sat Ryan Carter, a man who was known across the city, not for his kindness, but for his sharp business mind. He was a billionaire, and his world was one of cold calculations, steel and glass towers, and a life that seemed to lack the warmth Emma gave to others so freely. He had been driving through the area that evening, hoping to clear his head after a long day, when his eyes caught the sight of Emma kneeling beside the young boy. Something about the scene caught his attention, and he couldn't look away. At first, it was just curiosity. Why would a young woman be out in the rain, taking care of a homeless child? But as Ryan watched Emma bring the boy into the diner and offer him food and warmth, something stirred within him. It wasn't just the act of kindness. It was the purity of it, the unspoken sincerity. Emma wasn't looking for recognition. She wasn't hoping for a reward. She was simply helping because she could. Ryan's heart, hardened by years of wealth and business dealings, was moved in a way that he hadn't felt in years. There was something about her selflessness, that stayed with him long after the moment passed. "Who is she?" he murmured to himself, his gaze fixed on the diner. For the first time in years, Ryan Carter felt something he had long since forgotten: admiration. Something in Emma's quiet strength called to him, a feeling that he couldn't quite understand but knew he couldn't ignore. The following days were a blur for Emma. She was juggling double shifts at the diner, trying to make ends meet, while also taking care of her younger brother, who depended on her to pay for his school fees. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. But Emma pushed through each day, focusing on the small joys, like helping a regular customer with a kind word or offering a warm meal to someone in need. She didn't have time to dwell on the boy she had helped that cold, rainy night. But his smile lingered in her mind, giving her the strength to keep going. Meanwhile, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, luxury cars, and a business empire that spanned the globe, but none of those things brought him the peace he had felt watching Emma that night. There was something pure about her, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Her selflessness, her genuine kindness, it was like a breath of fresh air in a world that had become so consumed by greed and self-interest. Ryan found himself driving back to the diner several times over the next few days. Though he had no real reason to, he simply couldn't shake the memory of her. He had to know more about this woman who seemed to have a heart of gold. One evening, after another exhausting day of business meetings, Ryan made a decision. He put on a sharp suit, one that seemed almost out of place for a diner, and made his way to Rose's. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped inside, and Emma, as always, greeted him with a bright, welcoming smile. Her hair was a little frizzy from the humidity, but her energy remained as radiant as ever. "Welcome to Rose's," Emma said cheerfully, balancing a tray of plates in her hands. "Have a seat anywhere you like." Ryan froze for a moment, struck by the familiarity of her face. It was as if he had known her all his life, though they had never met before. He chose a corner booth, his eyes never leaving her as she moved about the diner, serving customers with the same warmth and care she had shown that night. Emma treated everyone the same, whether it was an elderly customer who needed help counting change, a struggling mother who appreciated a free coffee refill, or a regular who seemed unusually quiet. She saw people for who they truly were, and she treated them with kindness, regardless of their circumstances. As Ryan watched her, he realized something important. It wasn't just her actions that impressed him, it was the way she made people feel. She wasn't just hardworking, she was extraordinary. There was something about Emma that made the world seem a little bit brighter, a little more bearable. When his meal was finished, Ryan handed Emma the bill. But as he stood up to leave, he slipped an envelope underneath his plate. Emma didn't notice it until she went to clear the table. And when she saw the envelope, her heart skipped a beat. She opened it carefully, revealing a stack of crisp bills, far more than a normal tip would ever amount to. Emma's hands trembled as she counted the money. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this man? And why had he left such an extraordinary amount? She ran outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious benefactor. But the sleek black car she had noticed earlier was nowhere in sight. The street was quiet, and Ryan was already gone. Emma stood there for a moment, the envelope still clutched in her hands, feeling a mix of confusion and gratitude. Who was he? And why had he given her such a generous gift? The rest of the night passed in a blur, with Emma unable to stop thinking about the man who had left the tip. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. But life went on, as it always did. Emma returned to work the next day, focusing on the customers that filed in for breakfast, trying to push the memory of the generous stranger from her mind. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment when she had opened the envelope. Then, around midday, as the lunch rush started to settle in, the front door of the diner swung open again. Emma didn't notice him at first. She was busy taking an elderly couple's order. But then the hostess came over to her, whispering that a gentleman at a corner table had asked for her specifically. Emma looked up in surprise, and when her eyes met the man's, a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. He smiled at her, and for a moment, she almost felt as though she knew him. Though she couldn't place him, she walked over to his table, her notepad and pen in hand, trying to shake the odd feeling that had settled in her chest. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone friendly despite the curious tug in her heart. "What can I get you today?" The man hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice calm and deliberate. "I'll take the special of the day," he said. But then he added something that caught Emma off guard. "Only if you promise to take a break and join me for coffee later." Emma blinked, a little taken aback. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said politely, "but I don't usually take breaks during my shift. Is there anything else you'd like with your order?" The man chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with a knowing smile. "Just the special." Then he said, handing her the menu. Emma walked away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was different. She felt as though he knew her, though he hadn't said much. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, and she couldn't help but wonder why. What was it that drew him to her? As Emma brought the man his bill, she noticed him studying her quietly. His gaze lingered on her, as though he were trying to understand something deeper, something more than just the surface of her tired smile. When she placed the bill on the table, he reached into his wallet, pulling out a credit card. But as she turned to leave, he stopped her, his voice steady yet full of intent. "Wait," he said, causing her to pause and glance back at him. "There's something I'd like to ask you." Emma tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "Yes." The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you remember helping a homeless man on the street last week?" he asked softly. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, I do," she replied, bewildered by how he could possibly know. "How do you know about that?" He smiled knowingly. "Let's just say I saw something that day. A young woman who went out of her way to help someone in need. I was impressed by your compassion." Emma blushed, feeling a mix of humility and embarrassment. "It was nothing really," she said, her voice faltering. "He needed help, and I just did what anyone should do." The man shook his head gently. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have just walked by without a second thought." He handed her a folded piece of paper along with the bill. "This is for you," he said. "Open it after I leave." Emma stared at the paper in confusion, but too polite to refuse. She tucked it into her pocket. The man stood up, offering one last smile before walking out the door. As soon as she was alone, Emma quickly unfolded the note. Her breath caught in her throat as she read it, a check for $50,000. Along with a handwritten message, "Your kindness has inspired me. Use this to create the future you deserve. A grateful stranger." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why would someone do this for her? Who was this man? But he was gone, and she had no way of finding him. For weeks, Emma tried to make sense of the generous gift. She used the money to pay off her debts and start saving for her dream, a small cafe where everyone, including the homeless, could find a warm meal and a welcoming smile. But even as she moved closer to that dream, she still wondered about the man who had made it all possible. Then, one day, as she walked home from work, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and there he was, the generous stranger from the diner. "I hoped I'd find you," he said, grinning. Emma stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "You again," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Why did you give me that money? Who are you?" The man stepped out of the car, his expression both serious and kind. "I owe you an explanation," he said. And then he smiled. "My name is Alex Morgan. I'm the CEO of Morgan Enterprises." Emma's jaw dropped. Morgan Enterprises? The name sounded so familiar. Alex Morgan was one of the wealthiest men in the country, a name known across the globe. "I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted to see how you would react," he continued. "I've spent years building wealth, but I've never seen anyone as selfless as you. What you did for that homeless boy wasn't just an act of kindness, it showed who you really are." Emma struggled to process everything. "But why would someone like you care about me?" she asked, still trying to understand. "I'm just a waitress." Alex smiled gently. "You're far more than that. You have a heart that money can't buy. And I believe the world needs more people like you." He handed her an envelope. "This is a deed to a small cafe downtown. It's yours now. Consider it an investment in someone who truly deserves it." Tears filled Emma's eyes as she looked at the man who had changed her life. "But why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just promise me one thing," Alex said, his voice soft but firm. "Keep being the person who inspired me. Keep helping others." From that day forward, Emma's life was transformed. Her cafe became a haven for those in need, just as she had always dreamed. And though she never fully understood why fate had brought Alex Morgan into her life, she knew one thing for certain: kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. Thank you for listening to Emma's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories that inspire and uplift. Stay tuned for our next video.